Hello, welcome. I'm Chantal Blakely. I'm the manager of public programs here at the GSD, and I am the moderator and host of this event. It's the first time we've done something like this, so it's going to be a little awkward, I think. But I hope that will help in the sense that I'd like this to be a conversation rather than a kind of lecture-style presentation. I hope you'll all participate. So I'm just going to make just a few remarks to try to put this in context. So this is basically an attempt to start a sort of maybe more formalized discourse on design criticism here. Design criticism is a topic that I've recently just become aware of as a topic of study in and of itself outside architecture schools. And perhaps if it's something we talk about in schools of architecture, urban planning, and landscape architecture, maybe it's talked about in a different way here than in the wider discourse. And I'm hoping that we might all become more aware of all the variety of discourse on design criticism by starting to talk about it. Last night we had a workshop here, and we had several students take part in it. Some of you are here. Thank you for coming back. So this is a kind of more public component of that, and I hope a further stage of what's going to happen here. So I've just written something very brief that I will read, and then we'll go to the presentation, to the discussion. At an early stage in developing this event, when I sent a message to students to find out who was interested in writing and criticism and what their concerns were, the many responses circled around the theme of the scope and breadth of critical discourse, especially the wish for a serious critical discourse that would include an academic and non-academic audience, and that might be diverse, not just ethnically and in terms of gender, but also geographically and economically. The three presentations we will hear tonight are by no means comprehensive relative to these concerns, or for that matter, to the many senses of design criticism. I can think of at least three: design criticism as criticism of design, or design as criticism, or criticism by design, that is to say, or design, criticism that tries to precipitate something through a critical act. But nonetheless, each of these presentations deals with an edge of criticism, I would say, although we can judge that. In particular, the prospect of criticism that might have happened in one way that happens in a new way. For example, moving from academic discourse to, say, social media. Or in the transition from one medium to another as a critical mode. So my hope is that these ideas and the discussion that will follow will bring new voices to the conversations that exist here and raise the profile of criticism as a topic of conversation, and in particular one that we might continue in subsequent events. So with that said, I'll introduce the speakers. Each of them will speak for, let's say, 15 minutes, maybe a little more, followed by discussion, in which I hope that many of you will participate. So first we will hear from Florencia Rodriguez. She is a Loeb Fellow this year at the Graduate School of Design, and she's also an architect and critic based in Buenos Aires. She's founder and director of Piedra, Papel y Tijera Publishers. I know, welcome to laugh at my terrible Spanish pronunciation, but I'm sorry, to correct me.
No, it's okay. It's rock. Yeah, exactly. Rock, scissors, paper.
Rock, scissors, paper. In 2010, she created Plot, a platform that includes a magazine and an online portal dedicated to sharing examples of practicing criticism, connecting Latin American architecture to international discourses and spheres of production. Florencia is also a curator. Her recent work includes Hex, Arquitectura Argentina Contemporanea, Nunca fuimos eternos, and Post, Post, Post. That one I did fine. She's collaborated in the Buenos Aires Biennale since 2007, as well as coordinating the Centro de Estudios de Arquitectura Contemporánea of the Torquato School of Architecture. Our second speaker, Mimi Zeiger, is a journalist and critic based in Los Angeles. She's editor and publisher of the zine and blog Loud Paper, and a founding member of hashtag Limelight.
Leagues and Legions.
Okay, Leagues and Legions, an architecture and publishing think tank. Her writings about art, architecture, urbanism, design have appeared in the New York Times, Dwell, and Domus, in addition to Architect, where she is a contributing editor. Her books include Tiny Houses, Microgreen, Tiny Houses in Nature, and New Museums. She teaches in the Media Design Practices MFA program at Art Center, and she's lectured widely. Our third speaker, Alexandra Lang, is also a Loeb Fellow here at the Graduate School of Design. She is an architecture and design critic based in New York, whose writing has been published in Architect, Domus, Dwell, Medium, Metropolis, New York Magazine, New York Blog, and the New York Times. And she's a featured writer at Design Observer, the online publication. She's taught in the Design Criticism and MA program at the School of Visual Arts, and in the Urban Design and Architecture program at New York University. Her recent publications include the book Writing About Architecture, Mastering the Language of Buildings and Cities, the ebook The Dot-Com City, Silicon Valley Urbanism, the book Design Research, The Story That Brought Modern Living to American Homes, co-authored with Jane Thompson. And she's contributed to several books, including Formica Forever, published this year. So we'll first hear from Florencia, who will explore the question of criticism's social and disciplinary responsibility. Next from Mimi, who will consider expanded models of architectural criticism and discursive platforms. Then from Alexandra, who will explain why and how she thinks architects should use Twitter and Instagram. And with short presentations on the table, we'll have a discussion.
Do you have a PowerPoint?
No,
Oh, okay.
it's just going to be words. Sorry. Well, first of all, I want to thank Chantal Lelsky. It's a great opportunity to be here and to share the panel discussion with two great committed women. It's interesting to have that. Please, I don't know, we have to deal with my English pronunciation. If there is any doubt, just stop me and we can try to figure it out. One of the questions posed here is evidently what criticism, or that is a question that I want to ask usually, what criticism? In Spanish, that what could be also understood as a which. It's not the same question, but we can use it with that ambiguity. And with that, I want to imply that two things, both the doubt about the possibility of criticism or critique itself, as well as the full denial of just one way of practicing and understanding it. That impossibility of criticism is announced in a certain way in the title of this panel. The idea of a frontier or different frontiers and ambiguity are inherent to criticism. Foucault, in a lecture at the French Society of Philosophy in 1978 called What's Critique, pointed out that one of its first definitions would be the art of not being governed quite so much. That is to say that the critical attitude would theoretically pursue independence and a certain autonomy, but at the same time it wouldn't exist without its liaisons or the dependence to the object. I choose this time to use critique and criticism as synonymous because in mine, as in most of the Latin languages, there is no differences between these two words. One could suppose that the former implicates an informed opinion tending to objectivity, or that it is inserted in a more scientific discourse, but even if you are not very confident of that apparatus of thought, we are discussing about a specialized format of this practice, design and architecture criticism. Critique was born in the century of systematization, legitimation, and organizations of facts of the modern world. It presented a mode of thought to relate rationally to the present time, making philosophy and the critical attitude the abstract problematization, I don't know if that word exists, of the modern being. This attitude is meant to be the alert, the B-side of a political and social order. It's denunciative other with an ephemeral objective, enabling a determined kind of relationship to what exists. Foucault would say, and I quote, "Whatever the pleasures or compensations accompanying this curious activity of critique, it seems that it rather regularly, almost always, bring not only some stiff bit of the utility it claims to have, but also that it is supported by some kind of more general imperative, more general still than that of eradicating errors. There is something in critique which is akin to virtue." I know that these ideas about utility and virtue may run the risk of sounding old-fashioned in a way, but I'm an optimist by nature, and I believe that criticism is driven by the possibility of transformation, of making things better. And if critics publish, tweet, chat, and exchange ideas, it is because there is some idealism involved in it, and a need to communicate and expand our discourse. We will go back to this later. It seems as if today we would be permanently trying to get used to our realities, the extreme changes of communications that have taken place and the ones we cannot yet predict, the shift from continuity to iteration, the devices, and all of the things that define our existence now confront us necessarily with questions about mostly every precept concept. To refresh quickly some facts, Internet was commercialized in the 90s, and in 1997 Google was created, Twitter was created in 2006, Facebook in 2004, the iPhone was launched in 2007, Wikipedia in 2001, Amazon, and with it an abrupt change in online retail is from 1995. And we could go on with Blogspot, WordPress, MySpace, and lots of different kinds of media, Skype, or the already dead ICQ or Napster. There are so many things going on there. Our whole relationship with time, space, and our everyday agenda were subjected to constant change during the last 20 years. I would say that my job, as it is today, and in the way we make the magazine, for instance, it wouldn't be possible 20 years ago. Those are the biggest global cultural signs of change that we have experienced in the last half-century, and although one feels there could be new meanings to the same words every few minutes, or even new words, some of the matters related to this phenomena were already into the discussion of a different world, decades before the internet. Just think about the repeated enunciations of the end of history of art, the postmodern debate, and things we already know. Or specifically within architecture culture, what we experience is from postmodernism to deconstructivism, witnessing the explosion of what were already the pieces of any fixed or unified discipline, tradition, or at that point, language. Or Foucault. I have been using his ideas here, having in mind this definition of critique of 1978 to repeat as something, in his own words, inevitably and by nature condemned to dispersion, dependency, and pure heteronomy. The exacerbation of the critical discourse of the 60s and the 70s and decades later, after those several significant displacements that I mentioned before, the complete transformation of interaction itself, and with it of the vehicles and means of criticism, just emphasized that formal conditions of the dispersed, the dependent, or the heteronomy. At the same time, as we know, these new platforms amplified audiences, multiplied voices, and are putting criticism into discussion again, but live and globally. Latin America, for instance, that had suffered of a very long and strong silence of criticism in the last 20 years, being very conditioned by Tafuri, for instance, or other thinkers thinkers of the 70s, is now starting to find other paths to take a part of a renewed interest. Dispersion and dissolution, as we have seen, don't mean disappearance or the cease of existence, but on the contrary, more of a spilling, a dissemination, and a distribution. It is that revolution from contained discourse towards a collectivity that is being analyzed here, and therefore its properties, new opportunities, and ambiguities. Though as this new nature seems organic to the critical attitude, as we described it before by Foucault, it is full of other kinds of inconsistencies, for sure, and maybe, could we say, even dangers. Many years ago, while writing a text, I accidentally ran into this book called Don't Make Me Think, a common sense approach to web usability. It was a bestseller, first launched at the beginning of the 2000s, and had other revised editions during the decade. The author is a web designer. This usability concept, as you know, became really popular during the 90s, and he works with it understanding a way of strategic web design in which the users don't have to be submitted to take any complex decision, but just to follow the yellow line, like in The Wizard of Oz, without questioning. Prague, that is his surname, described this social behavior from what he calls extreme common sense, enumerating certain facts, such as, for instance, we don't read but scan. We don't take the best decisions, we just want to get satisfied. We don't think how things work, we just navigate. That automaton attitude is something that we pursued for certain web-related activities, but that is also generating a behavior pattern thing that gets translated many times to the physical world. In my personal opinion, in many cases, this subrogates some layers of sensitivity and understanding. We have also met a very important reinforcement of pragmatism in different intellectual scenarios. For instance, and to exemplify with some familiar ideas here, in 2005, in this article called Critical of What, published by the Harvard Design Magazine, Reinhold Martin criticized Bruno Latour, who is one of the most influential thinkers for architects in the past decade, and his ideas about critique, referring to an article by this philosopher titled, "Why Has Critique Run Out of Steam? From Matters of Fact to Matters of Concern." He said that piece summarized Latour's intentions to replace an epistemology infused by the spirit of revolt and radical politics with a new realism in which everything is contestable. Martin continued, and I quote, "For Latour, critique is basically code for Marxism, which along with other modernisms and their denunciatory tendencies, he's at pains to denounce and replace with a vaguely postmodern version of American pragmatism oriented towards renovating the institution of parliamentary democracy. The instrumentalization the discipline does of Latour's ideas, as it happened before with other intellectuals, is another complete subject. So why do we need criticism? We need it not to be governed quite so much, as we said, and I would say to aim for virtue. A virtue that is made of strata and various interests. Let them be social, political, technological, or maybe just related to beauty and experience. And for that, we need to distinguish between usability patterns, in which ideas could be understood as tools or intellectual entertainment, which I don't discard at all, but it's another thing, and utility in a way of serving the cultural production of our time. As it is characteristic of the dispersed to disaggregate, sometimes it could get confusing and difficult to link things and to make sense. It is important to educate and inform intuition to differentiate, and it is important to edit. Another of the contemporary problems of criticism is how can it aim to eradicate errors if we don't use the reductive good versus bad system of judgment anymore, and we have to provide with a new set of criteria. Its responsibilities are more related now to pointing out the special characteristics of an architectural or urban act, to be able to compare, give context, and interrogate its objects, to open the analysis to as much theoretical compromises with reality as available, and to make collective and democratic the process of communication and thinking. Critique wants to make evident the possibility of taking active part of the construction of our environment. I like to think of myself as an activist, though I don't use neither protest nor denunciative tones in my work. What I do is trying to shape ideas in ways that people first relate easily to them and then participate with a stronger commitment. And that is the way to make collective this way of thinking. The possibilities of criticism today include the traditional writing exhibitions and symposia, of course, but an infinite new formats that are being explored and rehearsed constantly. And I hope to be able to try some things here during the year. Language is as well critics' main mean and its ultimate frontier. Ours is an impossible activity in a way, impossible because it would never be that it aims for, but it is still guided by a shy form of utopia. To finish going back to Foucault, I will borrow one last definition of critique. It is an instrument, a means for a future or truth that it will not know nor happen to be. It oversees a domain it would want to police, and it's unable to regulate. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the thank yous. Thank you, Chantal and Ben and everyone who participated in yesterday's workshop with rereading. We'll get to that in a little bit. And it's really great to be here with Alexandra and Florence. Yeah, it's a real thrill to talk about a subject that kind of is all-consuming all the time. If I'm going to talk about emerging or emerged platforms and something that I call collective criticism, we have to start here. Like, we have to start here with the meme ferocious forms. We have to start here because it really would be too cheeky for me to start here. With the meme Ryan Gosling Architecture from 2012, which in the tradition of Tumblr memes mashes up the culturally high with the culturally low, creating, hey girl, my house isn't a machine for living, it's a machine for lovin'. And it creates, a Photoshop tone poem that answers to its own logic, the combination of text and image. We know sort of how montage works, yet here on the internet it's fast and, should I say, furious. So back to the cats. Ferocious Forms, which took off in 2011, is architecture plus LOL cats. And whether or not you like cats or not, I'm not crazy about cats. But cats are what the internet is made of, apparently. Well, cats and porn. I guess that's the Ryan Gosling part. So the images that are collected on Ferocious Forms, and this is just one of them, of probably about 100 images, they're collected on a single site, and they're produced by many authors around the same theme, kitty plus building. The Tumblr is in itself anonymous, and the images are gathered through open submission. I like this meme for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's in the tradition of collage as critique, not unlike Stanley Tigerman's The Titanic, which in sinking Mises' crowned hall at IIT makes commentary on the changing role of modernist pedagogy in Chicago and elsewhere. So if Tigerman's Titanic let us know that Mises is no longer king of the world, then what do the LOL cats tell us? Perhaps that there is a critical backlash to the steady stream of images available online. The introduction of a cat into the production of iconic imagery creates a détournement, a point of resistance that disturbs the consumption of architecture only as image. However, I'm really interested in how these images are aggregated together, individual actions aggregated into a single meme, aggregated into a single action. In 2010, Clay Shirky, the digital cultural critic, dubbed this kind of collective activity as cognitive surplus in a book of the same name. His premise was that the internet harnesses creative energy. Where Americans once spent millions of hours collectively watching television, that spare time is now put into interaction online. Interaction meaning the making of LOL cats and the sort of the posting of YouTube videos. But that interaction is actually engagement rather than just consumption. His cognitive surplus theory gained traction with Arab Spring protests documented on Twitter, although to what degree that is really true can be argued, and with Occupy Wall Street in 2011. So what this image is here is from a fall 2011 Occupy protest at UC Berkeley. I picked it up off of Twitter. It's when architecture students came up with the idea to fill tents with balloons and float them over Sproul Plaza, since they were banned from being used on the ground and camping in them. For me, this is a moment which was traded around the internet rapidly, where the tent transformed from a passive functional object to a symbol of protest. It became an LOL tent. So I'm interested in Twitter not for the oft-touted democracy of it and the democracy of social media, but because when we apply Shirky's cognitive surplus to criticism, something really exciting happens. The crisis of the death of criticism and the devaluing of the authority of a single critic are replaced by expanded platforms of the social web, which when leveraged, they take the power of the network public sphere and turn it into sort of an activist voice. And for this, I suggest the term collective criticism to describe it. Now, collective criticism is born of the social web. It operates on, across, and between platforms. It's made up of individuals, but it takes its power from responsive dialogue, not autonomous authorship. So in that sense, Ferocious Forms, the power is not in any one of the LOL cats, it's in the combined grouping of the entire meme. So I'm going to just take a quick step back in time and look for a second at my own history and why I feel collective criticism is important. And so I wanted to share with you, this is a call for submissions. It's a post-it that I made in 1997 for Loudpaper, a zine I started. It spells out an openness to discourse at a time when the camps were even more polarized between the profession and the academy in terms of publishing. This is 97, a little like just beginnings of the internet, and definitely not in the social web side of things. Zines in this era are sort of like proto-blogs. So this is the part that I still come back to. Loudpaper is open to all students, architects, educators, Girls About Town, Dear Johns, and critics as a place for writing loud about architecture and culture. And I don't think any of the addresses on this web or real work anymore. in sort of casting a wide net for critical voices, I want to come to Stephen Duncombe, a NYU professor, and he writes in his book, Notes from the Underground, Zines and the Politics of Alternative Culture, quote, "In an era marked by the rapid centralization of corporate media, zines are independent and localized, coming out of cities, suburbs, and small towns across the USA, assembled on kitchen tables. They celebrate the every person in a world of celebrity, losers in a society that rewards the best and the brightest. Zinesters privilege the ethic of DIY, do-it-yourself, saying make your own culture and stop consuming that which is made for you." And I think this predicates Shirky's sort of idea of cognitive surplus, that you are engaged and that you begin to sort of develop a network, and at this time it was a kind of a mail art network of how do you trade zines. However, in 2009 on a panel discussion, Duncombe said of this world that he described so eloquently, alternative culture is totally absorbed into the web. So in that case, differentiation then becomes the issue. Collective criticism opens up the possibility of many criticisms rather than a singular dominant discourse. It's true that the overused truism, everyone is a critic, holds only minor sway when applied to individuals, but gains strength when understood collectively. So who are collective critics? They're us. They're both influencers and audience. There's a simultaneous sort of tension between both consuming and producing. And that's very true of the DIY movements. Collective criticism bears resemblance to crowdsourced journalism, where distributed citizen journalists contribute to news stories via online tools, and in doing so turn reporting into a model of aggregated production. Like crowdsourcing, it draws on both expert and amateur sources. But collective criticism really isn't about neutral or seamless outcomes that categorize journalism. Instead, there's an emphasis on extended research, dialogic critique, and debate. I want to just show you this project, the geologic project. This is Ethel Barona-Pohl's Facebook post. It's a discussion and debate that happened in the middle of August regarding the aestheticization of poverty by architects. Without going into too much of the content, I want to track the social media stream which caused this sort of extended dialogue to happen. It started with a tweet by a blogger named Nick Axel regarding a post on a mainstream design blog on Design Boom about the UGO architecture and their trash a pavilion that they had created, or the project that was being featured. It was then made into a Facebook post, which shown here, and here, and here, and this is about a third of sort of the dialogue that began to happen on Facebook. It then culminated into two blog posts, which I'm not going to show, one on DPR Barcelona, a website and blog and publishing house, and one on the site of the Funambulist by Leopold Lampert. With each iteration and switching platforms, the content was extended, and there was also, as much as there was stuff being developed on Facebook, there was, and the two blog posts sort of didn't happen simultaneously. They sort of happened, one happened in about the middle of the discussion, the other one happened towards the end, and sort of took a whole transcript of all of this you can find. But also that there were simultaneous posts going on Twitter. So I mean, this is a really robust discourse around a particular question in architecture about what do you do when architects begin to sort of look at slums and favelas and try to make an architecture of that, and who wins in that situation. And I highly recommend that you go back and read through it. So And another project, well, let's start here with the hashtag. For those who were in the workshop last night, this is very familiar. If there's a symbol for collective criticism, I suppose it is the hashtag. And if there's a symbol that strives to bring meaning into this sort of global network of like tweets and posts and Facebook likes and all of the noise, it's the hashtag. It's digitally ubiquitous on Twitter and Instagram, and the symbol holds what I think is a very distinct power, which is to convene a commons, to convene a theme or people talking about one thing. So while fail and witting, dominate the trend wars on Twitter, the platform does offer a possibility for collective critical discourse. So recently, the cheeky and activist hashtag FolkMoMA served as a rallying cry across the internet, bringing together writers and designers in protest of MoMA's decision to demolish the American Folk Art Museum. FolkMoMA founders Ana Maria Leon, who I think is here, and Killian Miano used @FolkMoMA, a Twitter site, and this Tumblr site to foment activism. Their call for ideas asked for a draw, sketch, Photoshop collage, and possibilities of interaction for the American Folk Art Museum. And the projects were collected on Tumblr, which you see here, and you can sort of see the tips and tops of some of the projects, and then some quotes from the various articles that were being written around FolkMoMA at the time. Yet the crux of hashtag FolkMoMA lies with the power of that hashtag, which led the Architect newspaper editor Alan Brake to write the following on May 9th. Sensing a renewed spirit of engagement and activism around equality, urbanism, architecture, and education, exciting, FolkMoMA, Free Cooper. So I think there's something, great in that sense that Twitter then becomes even the place for sort of mainstream architecture publications to sort of engage with something that might be way more activist. And so that the lines between what is a dominant discourse, what is sort of our expected places for knowledge around architecture are able to be undermined and sort of become a frictional space where more voices can enter into the discussion. And sometimes I like to experiment with what this space looks like and even be a little bit mannerist in the production of things for the space. So this is a project called Platform Project. And hashtag Platform is a collaboratively produced publication. In this case, it's a print publication. It was produced for the SBA's Design Criticism Summer Design Writing Intensive, which some of the folks are here tonight. And it was designed by Neil Donnelly, but all of the content is curated tweets from students who were tweeting around New York City in the summer for 2 weeks. The tight constraints of Twitter proved a testing ground for collective criticism, asking how much can you say in 140 characters. By moving from digital to analog, it presents conversational, observational, narrative, and critical tweets produced during the intensive. There's a couple more images of it. It was designed to be a booklet that you put together, but you could also take the little handles and put them back out into the city. And then we did it again the following summer, but this time we created a website, and here's the website, which if you go to decrit.edu/platform2013, you will see sort of a series of moving images of tweets that were developed. There's probably about 100 tweets on there. It's about taking 2 weeks of collected material, say like 1,000 tweets, and distilling it down to 100 tweets, where you're able to sort of make make change onto what is often considered a sort of the stream of the internet, the sort of jumble, the tweeting is used diversifully. So here we're able to sort of curate these into sort of specific ideas around what does it mean to be in the city over this period of time. Here we took the website, and then we're not content of just sort of making something for the web and then putting it back on the web. It was made for the web, and then it was projected onto the windows of 21st Street in Manhattan in order for these things, which are small, little sort of missives from your phone or from your device, that are then writ large across the city. And so you can see the scale of this, maybe here a little bit better, that the tweets then become sort of window size, or sort of, this, what is that, about 15 feet by like 12 feet. And so that they're able to sort of take up our room, sort of demand a presence. And so these small observations are treated as important as if they were billboards. And then last night, and sort of ended here. So last night we did a similar, sorry, it was the best I had. We did a similar project where I asked students to read 2 critical texts, make critiques on the text, and then we went and critiqued the critiques of the critique, I think that's right, on Twitter. And then we went through and curated those tweets into a performance that's videotaped and will be edited and put online in the next couple of months. So what I'm just guessing, a couple of days, a couple months. But I think what's really exciting here in the movement of things that are sort of testing from Twitter to, say, handbills, to billboards, and now to performance, is that we're able to sort of test the frictions of these different platforms and sort of, and validate in a way the real life potentialities of sort of online culture. By verbalizing and physicalizing the tweets, which fall somewhere between observation and slogan, we then reinforce criticism's immediacy and its potential for impact. Thank you.
What's your Twitter?
At Loudpaper.
Hi, thank you all for coming, and thanks for Chantal for having the idea for this panel. So there's a rule of thumb that you should only tweet about yourself 30% of the time on Twitter. Now that is a rule that many architects, particularly architecture firms, break again and again. They treat Twitter and Instagram as simple extensions of their marketing and communication strategy, another way to let people know where their partners are speaking, that their projects are being built, and that they have received good reviews. Happy, 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 busy, 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 me, me, me. Mimi's already spoken today a little bit. I missed that. She's already spoken today about how social media has brought new dimensions to architecture criticism, offering a platform and leveling the playing field in a way for independent critics. But since we're here in an architecture school, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how architects should be using services like Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr to engage in dialogue about more than their own work. Think of social media as your first draft of history. In real life, most architects aren't quite as monomaniacal as their feeds, but there are some exceptions. Architects read reviews written about other people. They look at buildings built by other people. They even spend time not making architecture. And these other activities can and should inform their design work, albeit sometimes indirectly. What I tweet about is a fairly direct expression of who I am. I tweet about architecture, design, Mary Mecco, feminism, media, design for children, costume dramas. What continues to appeal to me about the form is not only the chance to show that I don't have a one-track mind, but that I think all of these topics are ultimately related, and each influences my take on the next. Let's unpack Walter Gropius's bow ties, which you see here at the end, for example. It's equally important for an architect as it is for a critic to show your audience where you're coming from. And reading, writing, seeing, and drawing form part of a larger cloud of association that one day critics will use to assess the architecture of today. A more flexible, critical, and conversational use of social media suggests interpretations before the concrete is dry. As an example, consider Philip Johnson. This was a wonderful chart that was published in Metropolis magazine a few years ago, even before infographics took over the world. I think of Philip Johnson as the most networked architect of his day, and I think Philip Johnson would have been really good at Twitter. He understood better than most that interest is created by association. That was the principle of his salons at the Glass House, drawing the latest and greatest from a variety of cultural realms. They helped him stay young and current, and he helped them by offering literal or metaphorical institutional support. Isn't that really how Twitter works too? I look better when I spread the word about anybody's good work. And Johnson was a curator, but he was also a curator, in quotations, in the contemporary sense, collecting and distributing people and objects and styles. That's why his physical library at the Glass House is of interest. Inside, the shelves reveal what he thought was worth reading and keeping. Outside, its form essentially reveals the same. Michael Graves promoted and digested. Even earlier, look at Johnson in this May 1950 issue of Architectural Review, setting out the inspirations, possibly decoy inspirations, for his Glass House. Yes, there's Mies, but there's also the less expected references of Malevich and Ledoux. And there's even an image showing the brick house cut out of so many later presentations of the site. You can see it. I'll actually use the pointer for once right here. This is a very rare image of the house. There are so many readings based on this sort of buffet of red herrings that you've presented here, and I'll take false fronts over pure self-promotion any day. Trails of breadcrumbs like this are catnip for critics then and now, and he used this prestigious journal to try out his version of the Glass House's history, but you could be doing this every day for your own work. As an examples of architects that I think are going about this the right way, I would say that Sam Jacob and Charles Holland from FAT have established themselves as great critics of the contemporary and modern scenes. First on their own blogs, and now for the opinion section of Dezeen and Building Design. And I have to say that Dezeen even has an opinion section is a great victory. It helps that their work is rather obviously referential. You don't necessarily need them to connect the dots between Venturi and Scott Brown, the new domestic landscape, Palladio, but it indicates their interest in having a discussion that all their writing and research and curation and tweets connect. Writing short and long, this is just another view of this building that I really am going to have to see in person because I do not know what to make of it. And their practice in all of these different media really embeds them in digital culture as well as architectural culture. If there's a crisis for architecture today, it's partially a crisis of communication between architects and the public at large, the public at clients, and even with the media as a whole. By participating in social media, architects can learn how they are seen, how the hashtag architecture is deployed and interpreted. This is valuable information about how to communicate in multiple forms. For example, in my own critical practice, I found it incredibly enriching to Instagram my trips to new museums, exhibitions, and buildings as a way of sharing my first cut publicizing something interesting that I may never get to write about, and also teasing a larger piece. We're so often presented with the same image or images of the building over and over, but my unprofessional photographs, which you see here, pick up on different things, especially when I'm experiencing them with my daughter as the scale figure right there in the middle. At the very least, you can compare and contrast to the official photos. At the Parish Art Museum by Herzog and de Meuron, that's seen here, there's a little sign that says main entrance. The blind door handle that leads to a 10-foot high door that could wipe out anyone unawares, finishes that are already worn, scuffed, or taped, pointing out that if a building needs a sign to find the front door, there's something wrong with the building. Seems like the basic function of criticism, and you can do it with one photo. At a higher artistic level, there's someone like Yuan Ban, the architectural photographer, who's a prolific Instagrammer. And I think his Instagram reveals that he's seen more contemporary architecture than anyone else in the world, most of it from helicopters. And I find that there's something aggrandizing and even a little aggressive about the relentlessness of his travel and the harshness of the aerial views. But on the Instagram, I also see more humanizing aspects in the outtakes from his photo shoots. He doesn't usually show you the building that he's actually there to photograph, but all the things that are happening around the building, the faces of people, the faces of the buildings next door, things imperfectly lit and weathered. And so the heroic and the ordinary are combined in his feed. And I wonder if his Instagram will ultimately contribute to the way that we look at his work. It would be even better if the architects of these buildings were there with him too, Instagramming their own views of what they see to admire or not admire on the site. So how could you use it? Social media is a great way to add context before, during, and after a project. Consider something like a campus project. This building here is Harrison and Abramovitz's Hopkins Center at Dartmouth. And on a campus, your building is likely to be in dialogue not only with its neighbors and possibly a predecessor, but with the whole history of development and style across the campus. I'm thinking also now about the new addition to the FOG going up over there, which in so many material ways is making reference to Harvard, but it's going to be, I think, really interesting when it's completed to judge how well those references really read to the general public. Social media can allow an architect to show a wider audience of students, faculty, alumni, neighbors that they recognize that legacy and that they're looking carefully. That they're able to see a site as more than a frame for their contribution to it. Engagement with clients doesn't need to be limited to a specific forum. Dartmouth, surprisingly to many, has a really dense collection of notable and underknown modernist buildings. They've just completed an art center by Machado and Silvetti, which was the ostensible reason that I was on campus this day. But it's hard by the Hood Art Museum by Charles Moore, which you see here, which is about to be renovated by Todd Williams and Billy Chen, and across the plaza from that Performing Arts Center that I showed you before. It's quite a collection, and if you're working there, why not share the process of thinking about that collection by sharing images of favorite or inspirational details, moments of conflict, the materials palette. I started snapping pictures of all the back sides of these buildings because now that the Machado and Silvetti building is built over here on the other side of the Louise Bourgeois Spider, all of those backsides are far more activated than they were when it was just a parking lot on the site. So we see all those buildings in a new way. So I've talked a little bit about dialogue and a little bit about critique, but another important argument for architecture on social media is history. If architects don't speak for the quality, importance, and ubiquity of buildings worth preserving, who will? Some of you may have been following the news of Detroit's bankruptcy and the threat that the art collection of the Detroit Institute of Arts could be sold as just another city asset. As a protest over treating the collection as such and a recognition of its quality and importance to the city, In August, a group of 20 art blogs organized a day for Detroit under the hashtag #DayDetroit. As Christopher Knight wrote in the LA Times, its premise is simple and elegant. Use the internet to A, spread the word to a diverse international art audience about what could be lost if any sale goes forward. B, suggest that readers expand the process by posting their own links and images to social media sites like Twitter and Instagram. And C, generate support for the Detroit Institute of Arts by asking readers to click through and buy a museum membership, starting at $65. So besides interpretation, another important argument for architecture on social media is community. Social media collects. You can hashtag your firm, you can hashtag your campus, you can geolocate your project. You can tip your hat to a colleague, and in doing so, as the art blogs did with #DayDetroit, which then got collected on Tumblr, you can enter a broader dialogue about physical experience made up of pictures and words. Here, this is another example, I love this quote. A hashtag and a variety of old and new media platforms were used as a form of visual protest. But it got me thinking, it's not only Detroit's art assets that are being dispersed and destroyed, it's its architecture too. There's been a valuable discussion about the ethics of ruin porn and the aestheticizing of structures after they are too late to save. But what about Detroit's incredible architecture that's still standing? This is Mies van der Rohe's Lafayette Park development. Why couldn't we have, or why haven't we had, a #DayDetroit for architecture, where we point out the irreplaceable built assets that also may disappear through bankruptcy? As architects, we sometimes forget what other people don't know, or we forget to share the positive assets of the past before, during, and after they're threatened. We can see a parallel project in a book like Images of Architects, where Valerio Ogliati asked famous architects to send him images that show the basis of his work. But there's something so static and precious about this presentation, which was then shown in glass cases at the Venice Biennale. Let's not wait to be masters and wait for some curator to ask us to share work that is relevant to our architecture. Start showing the basis for it now. Tumblr, a visual blogging platform, has become the host to a number of projects along these lines, along with the #DayDetroit. The diversity of purpose and the cloud of connections that I think works so well on Twitter is all wrong on Tumblr. There you should specialize and hone your theme to a single word, like some of the memes that Mimi showed earlier. How else would fuck yeah brutalism, seen here, have 100,000 followers? Are you obsessed with the architecture of the past? Start your own Tumblr. How better to get the monkey of some designer obsession off your back than by creating a trove of the best, most suggestive imagery? It can also, as with #DayDetroit or the Brutalism site, collect the geographically disparate fandom in one place. Who knew that so many people liked brutalism? And here's a way to mobilize them the next time someone talks about tearing down Government Center. I also see a lot of graduate students with Tumblrs for their research, creating sort of a daily log of their best discoveries. Museums and archives have launched Tumblrs to showcase their collections and to do a deep dive into a particular archive that's in the process of being digitized. Architects of a certain age might think about doing something similar with their own files, again starting the wheels of interpretation and reflection. In the realm of archival Tumblrs, I particularly like the Miller House project at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, which is showing all aspects of the design, construction, and maintenance of this 1958 house by Eero Saarinen and Alexander Gerard. It makes visible the everyday work of living in a masterpiece and shows how architects get sucked into maintenance for decades. The Millers were still writing letters to Kevin Roach in the 1980s about retrofitting their bathrooms now that they were old. But how better to humanize the profession than to show how mundane its tasks can be. Ultimately, that's among the many things I think social media can do for architects. Make criticism, interpretation, dialogue, and history part of daily life. Some of this is probably already part of your daily practice, so why not share it and not wait until bankruptcy or obituary get people to talk about architecture? My last thought here is from Swiss Miss. Start having more conversations out loud and online. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Those were three very different and each in its own way quite interesting presentations. I have a couple questions, but I think rather than take the floor again, I'd like to start by seeing if anyone else would like to start the discussion with a question. And I would just ask that you say, let's see, what did I write down? I'm curious to know when you introduce yourself just briefly, like let us know who you are, and if you're a critic, if you consider yourself one, what if any media you use, Twitter handle optional, but anyone want to weigh in here? Yes?
Sorry. My name is Dan Koff. I'm Dan Koff. DanielKoff.org. So I guess maybe I'd consider my critic now thanks to Mimi's workshop.
I don't have to bless you on it. You have to claim it all on your own.
All right. Well, I'll run with it from now on. But I just want to. I guess I want to ask. I guess the one of the blocks from starting a blog or tweeting is the fear that you're going to say something that you will regret. So I wanted to ask you guys your experience in this field. If you had some thoughts that you don't put out there, how you filter. If you've said something that then you want to regret, that then you regretted, or if you said something that you didn't think was controversial, but then became very controversial unexpectedly.
Good question. Maybe we can take a couple more and then you can sort of respond and batch it if that works. Thank you. Yeah, there's one there.
Hi, I'm Sekou Cook. I'm a MR2 student here, and I guess by Alexandra's definition, I am a critic because I say wait a minute instead of saying wow. And Twitter at Sekou21. So I wondered for people for those of you who are constantly putting out work of writing on blogs, Twitter, and things that are getting e-published, whether you see or how you respond to people who see that as somehow lower forms of publishing than, say, physical print publishing or magazine publishing. It's probably a follow-up to the previous question.
Okay, and maybe one more question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tara. I'm a student in design and technology at Taratan. I used to write I used to be a critic for a newspaper in Singapore, Grand Law. I don't write anymore, I've been retired for a long time. So my question is, do people read anymore? And what keeps you writing?
Okay, so.
Well, I think we're all gonna have to pick off different bits of those questions,
Yeah.
probably. But I have to say, in terms of regret, I mean, I wrote an article a couple of years ago where I attacked the architecture critic of the New York Times, and it was really one of the most terrifying moments of my life, and I thought my career would be over after it, and none of that happened. So I have found by personal experience that you can say a lot of things as long as you say them well. And I think that is really important to keep in mind. I was terrified to publish that piece, and then my own mother said, "What have you got to lose?" And I thought, she's right. So just, my advice is if you're afraid, think it through, take your time. You can always write drafts of your tweets, though I don't think they're as good that way. But if you have a point and you believe in it, you should just say it. And I definitely think about Twitter as part of my professional persona, and I think before I tweet, and sometimes I think, oh, I'm edging over into too personal, so we'll delete that tweet. But you just kind of, once you do it, and that's the most important thing about all critical practices, like you just have to start doing it and you have to keep doing it. Once you do it, you develop a rhythm, you develop a voice, and then you kind of know what's suitable for your voice, at least in my experience. And as just to the question about online publishing, if I write something that's only in print, it feels like it never happened. So I think that it's really a generational thing about print versus online, and it's the combination of the two that's the most powerful.
What is it? Regrets, I have a few, but then again, too few to mention. Not really. I think that it can go on the theme of attacking New York Times critics, or in this case, a New Yorker critic. I was live tweeting Paul Goldberger's lecture at SciArc last year. And I ended up not exactly in a Twitter war, but I was kind of going back and forth with Paul at one point, and I actually didn't regret that. I actually was like, this is my right, I am here, I disagree sort of with where you're taking this sort of doom and gloom approach to where criticism is going, and my role is to sort of counter that, and if you are on Twitter, then I will engage you there because we're on equal footing. And I didn't regret it. It was, felt a little awkward to suddenly be getting him saying, I said eulogy, not eulogy, and I was like, well, you were in a lecture situation where I couldn't tell which one you said, but that point. And in terms of print versus digital, I really don't have any sort of bias one way or another at this point. I love print. I do projects in print, and as you can probably tell from some of the work, what I'm interested in is what happens when something maybe is taken from the digital and going into print, or something taken from print and going into digital, with criticism that may not actually be a one-to-one thing that's happening, like may not move that much. If it's just a written piece, but I think in some of these kinds of projects, take from Twitter to print or to billboards or to spoken word, adds a different kind of friction and sort of tests the language a little bit. Do people read? Yeah, people really read. People apparently read more now than they ever read. What's a fun fact? It was a Saturday edition of the New York Times has more content in it than what most people in the 17th century got in their lifetime. So yeah, I think people are still reading.
Well, to respond first to the regret question, I don't know if you regret something, but it's good to have the idea of that possibility to write in a good way, and also to justify, to understand, and to be a little more, I don't know, exigente, like a bit tougher with yourself and towards what you're delivering in a way. I think it's important to be also very faithful to the possible audience you have. So regretfulness in that way is kind of a good thing to remember, but I don't know, it's not also a thing that you should really care about in another way. I don't think there are lower forms of publishing. I usually publish in paper, but because of my context, in South America is really different. We don't really tweet. There is not a Twitter scenario for criticism. Of course, Twitter is great, but it's more personal thing, or maybe for entertainment and celebrities and friends, but not exactly. There is no architecture conversation going on there. So paper maybe in South America is still more strong, but not because of the relevance of what you said, but because of the dissemination and the possibility to be able to reach people the other way around of what we were saying. Of course, Facebook is a very strong platform, and we usually use, I don't know, sometimes we reproduce some text that's where in the magazine, in Facebook and in the website to be able to reach more people, because of course there are more potential readers there than with the paper and the hard copies. And do people read? I agree with the answers, but what keeps you writing is a very interesting question, and I think it's like, I don't know, a very important impulse, and the way that you think you are collaborating and co-creating is kind of our way of doing.
I also think it's interesting. I mean, I think of myself as just a writer, and so if I wasn't writing, I would not be able to say anything. But I think both Mimi and Florencia have a slightly more diverse practice and do more events and sort of like the workshop that you did last night. And so your writing is actually taking on a lot of different other forms, which is just an interesting manifestation of kind of the multiple platforms that we've been talking about.
I mean, I'm really interested in architecture culture, and as much as I'm interested in architecture, and so sort of working out some of these moments of architecture culture sometimes come out in a piece of journalism and a piece of criticism, sometimes, yeah, in an event or panel discussion, or, you know, I always am threatening to do the dance party around architecture, because I think, you know, that I'm interested in convening people to discourse. And at one time that was a zine, but I think now it can take many different kinds of modalities, and we're just sort of looking for sort of the next one. Like, the more people can talk about this, the more sort of alive it feels. That's sort of where I head.
Yes, there are different forms of getting people together, getting people talking and expanding ideas, and also having the possibility for those ideas to evolve or transform themselves or have forms. And also I think writing is a way of thinking. It's very different when I am talking or when I'm teaching or doing other things, that when you have this intimate activity of writing. It's really a different encounter with yourself, with this thing that we call architecture and cities and things, and it's a way of thinking.
Could I maybe jump in? Okay, so I would like to maybe take a moment to be like, if I may say, critical, and maybe press some of you on some of the things that you said. And in particular, I wonder if we can find a way to start to get at, to tease out these different media we've been talking about, and what their specificities might be, and what kinds of, let's say, ethical implications might surround some of them and not others. So in a sense, it's a follow-up to the question about sort of media snobbery. But I was really fascinated, Mimi, in your talk by the way that, like, say, Folk MoMA or the cat, it seems that
Ferocious forms.
the ferocious form or the hashtag, it becomes a kind of rallying point, maybe a touchstone for a conversation. And very quickly it seems that as the conversation springs to life, it becomes in a way a kind of insider conversation. So like, folk MoMA looks really interesting, but without reading the whole thing, like I might not really feel like I follow exactly what's going on. So there's a sense in which I think maybe media might be susceptible to a kind of stereotyping and a kind of, let's say, what's the word? Metonymy? Like a word becomes a metonym for something that's being talked about and then gets re-invoked as a metonym in the little short conversations that, or the short statements that ensue. And maybe loses what might have been a more complex representation by being translated into a sort of touchstone, which may not be a bad thing. And then the related question to all of you would be like, how do you, do you think that's a fair representation of, let's say, social media that I just made? And then if so, like, how do you see the temporality of work or criticism that comes out in that form? Like, what's its sort of expiry date? There's an essay by Rainer Banham called Design by Choice, in which he talks about why he thinks architects shouldn't design door handles and the more ephemeral machinery in buildings, because he thinks they're sort of set to think in terms of 50-year conceptions of value. Like what they make, they're taught to think that what they do should be valuable for 50 years. But other kinds of designers think on a shorter time frame. So is it possible that social media has a shorter temporality, that its value is in focus a day later or a week later, but not 10 years from now, whereas other kinds of media may be comprehensible for longer, or not, or maybe not.
I think that social media definitely has a temporality, though there are a variety of tools like Storify that can help you save those conversations forever. But you're right that sometimes if you enter in the middle of a conversation, you don't know what's going on, and you have to decide if you want to take the time and trouble to find out what's going on. But what I think was interesting about a number of the examples that Mimi cited was that they actually manifested themselves in multiple types of digital media, and I think and that it's like, the firestorm starts on Facebook, moves to Twitter, is archived forever in a blog post, and then maybe some other critic comes in and writes a think piece about it for print media. These things, like when something on social media happens that does need to last longer, is part of a larger discussion, I think it often becomes a multi-part sequence. And the great thing is that anyone can write any part of that sequence. That's a really interesting thing. And sometimes I'll have a Twitter conversation and then a month later I'm like, you know what, I'm still thinking about that. I'll do a blog post, or I should look into that, because it's like it's the spark of an idea that starts to happen. And then you can do whatever you want with that idea.
I think for me it goes back to questions of consumption. That yes, you can read Twitter or social media in general as sort of easily consumable, as snark, as sort of ephemera that is just sort of mind candy that kind of streams through. And if you have a tweet deck or something, it's kind of endless in that sense. But I would go back to sort of the question of engagement, that yes, you're just going to get a sentence or two and maybe a link, but then you are actually sort of responsible for sort of backtracking what that is, opening up that conversation, digging a little deeper, and that you become sort of part of it. It's your participation is then essential in order to sort of understand, and I think that gives a lot of agency to the diversity of people acting as critics, rather than rather than just to say, you know, if a single newspaper critic says one thing and that becomes party line, which I don't think it ever has, but you know, just that kind of sort of old school hierarchies, then it doesn't ask for an engagement, and that's just actually sort of a criticism as consumption.
I think that there are different ways of archive, you know, and that's a personal thing. You usually go to the bookstore and you get one of the books or a journal or something. On the internet, of course, the conversation is more difficult to archive, but I don't know, I collect articles for sure, for instance, or images, and you try to then, I don't know, have your own thing going on with this collection. So it's a different thing that having all this library with the books and with this like visual organization of things, but I think there are some articles that you want to collect and you use them later and you remember them in time.
Yeah.
The idea of criticism in theory in print media, or let's say more traditional modes of media production, it has along with it an idea of a project that an author is trying to pursue throughout multiple texts. And I wonder, what does Twitter do, or how does it reflect or change the idea of a critic's project?
For everybody.
Should we do the same thing and get a few more questions? Anybody else? Or not, maybe just go with this one.
I think Alexandra answered that pretty well in terms of sort of the critic's project, or the sort of the point of view that you then understand, sort of the voice of the critic sort of expanded. Even though I've presented about Twitter tonight, and so we're talking in Twitter language, I have a really hard time when format and over content becomes sort of where we end up. I mean, I feel like social media and the whole social web is about the creation of more content, more voices. So if we just sort of fixate on like 140 character tweets and sort of begin to narrow the project to just be about that, then we sort of lose the multiple platforms, the different kinds of ways of operating that the critic holds. And so this is just one tool that allows for the expression of a point of view.
But I think, I don't know, I believe in projects. Maybe that's terrible in this moment, but I do believe in that. And I think this thing that also Tino said about generating your own voice, and that implies a project whether you write it down or not, because you have your full ideas or your understanding of things, and you might do all the things attached to that or not, but it's a different way of understanding a project. For me, running publish a magazine, I do think that the project is very important, and it's very important to also have some voice into it, to be able to interact with people and not to be like this solid thing that is autonomous and without relationship to others. So there is a project, but it's a different kind of project, not universal, not unique, not with those older things.
I feel like there's a little bit of a fixation right now on project.
As a word?
Project as something that an architect must have, as if we're beginning, or even a critic must have, and that we're sort of doing the back end, front end. They're putting the cart before the horse. Sometimes it takes sort of the development of a body of work before you actually realize where the project is heading. Something like Lab Paper, which I started in '97, and part of why I include that slide in there is that I didn't realize how important sort of the collective voices and sort of the larger array of voices that I wanted to talk to would serve 15 years later. And so that project, while very consistently moved forward, didn't actually sort of materialize with a capital P until a little bit later down the line. And so sometimes maybe being lost a little bit, or have multiple projects with little p's, allows for sort of a plurality of thought and influence that a large P project from the get-go might stifle.
Yeah, I feel much in common with that answer because I mean, Florencia and I just got here as Loeb Fellows and people keep asking us what are we doing this year, which is a totally terrifying question, and I say, well, I have some themes, and the themes are basically, these threads of ideas that I wasn't able to follow up on when I, was writing all the time to make a living, and I'm hoping I can follow up on. And I mean, actually, just speaking of other platforms and social media, one of my favorite platforms is this thing called Read Lists that allows you to, like put a collection of articles together, just basically drag and drop. And I've started doing that with my own work around themes, because sometimes when you've been writing so much, as I think all of us write, you don't realize, oh, suddenly you have 10 pieces about this topic that you didn't realize you were so interested in. And that's another way where a different kind of platform, it's almost like you can make your own little ebook and think about like whether that's some project that needs to be expanded in a different way. But again, it's the back end, front end. It's like, oh, I accidentally, in my case, wrote 15 articles about children and design. I guess I'm kind of obsessed with that topic.
I don't know, but I want to take talking about the project, because I think it also depends on the way and the context you're working in. And of course, the project is like something that implies time, and I really believe that, I don't know, in my work, or at least, I don't know, I don't want to make the division with South America and here so strong for this, because I think when you have like a product that has to be developed on time, and you have to have one hard copy every 2 months, and you have to organize that material, it's important to have a project for me, and to know how to curate that material, because not everything is the same, and it's, of course, I don't know, you have to find a sense in this putting all together, and why you mix it up, and why that seems so different is there now. I don't know, you have to question it permanently. So it also depends on what kind of project you have, and what kind of product you're generating, and the way you're working with theory and criticism in that way.
Hi. So I have...
Wait, identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Ben Prosky, Assistant Dean for Communications, Harvard Graduate School of Design. And then I will then out myself by asking a very kind of selfish question on behalf of the institution. If architects or individuals should only tweet about themselves or talk about themselves 30% of the time, do you have any advice for what institutions should do in terms of their voice? Because their voice is of many, and putting out an opinion on behalf of an institution is a very tricky thing. So is there a place for it? Is an institution's kind of mandate to just objectively put out work, but then where's the place for criticism? And is a platform that shows work without being outwardly critical invalid? Or isn't that the role of the critics who are not attached to it to come find that? I'll let you answer that, but just, we have, I guess, the place for criticism on our website, right? You can actually comment under stories, we post news stories, rarely happens, or the comment is offensive or whatever, and nobody wants to jump in there, so often it's not moderated either. We don't have the time. Is it really of value there? Anyway, that was sort of my question about the institution as a tweeter.
Well, maybe the institution doesn't need to be critical, but it does need to be interesting. And I think that it could make itself more interesting by describing the circle of influence and association of the GSD wider, and maybe admitting voices that are critical of some things as part of the community, even if it's not, said from the institutional voice, and trying to show the full diversity of the students and faculty and work that's being created here, rather than, as I feel like often happens on institutional websites, filtering it down to sort of the, most acceptable, most middle of the road.
I think in that case, it's about identity and try to look at the values of the institution and take advantage of all the people you have here. That's really interesting, and for sure they would be glad to collaborate.
And I would say it's about, with an institution, it's not about necessarily identity, but it's about milieu. So in a way, how does a Twitter feed then create an atmosphere rather than a voice, per se?
Other questions? Yeah, Irene?
And then I guess I'll ask from the standpoint of the student, and for better or worse, we're identifying ourselves as students of the GSD now. And what advice would you give for us to try to inject levity and humor and personality into what we're saying, but then try to maintain this level of rigor and academic relevance in what we're putting out there as students who don't have a following and legitimacy as we three have?
I'm not sure you need all that legitimacy and following in order to sort of begin this pursuit.
Yeah, it's related. I guess I'm very interested. My name is Cordine. I'm a Mark 1 student here. I'm interested in the trying to reach. Say if you're trying to broaden your reach, right? Of your audience, or for instance, you have to kind of speak in a language or communicate in a language that speaks to maybe a particular demographic. So if you want to reach young people, meme culture is easier to kind of do for that kind of thing. So you're very, very targeted in your outreach strategies for a lot of these social media platforms. And in certain extents, it becomes watered down, or your means of communication becomes less. There becomes a space in which you might be devalued in this way when you're kind of like watering down content to reach a different demographic. So what's the tools through which you kind of engage that?
I think this kind of goes to both Irene and your comments, is that if something, again, is well written, it can bridge between smart and serious and funny, or disarming, or it can carry all of those, and it becomes a question of language. But also identifying audience not as something that you water down to or talk down to, but maybe that you use a language that is universal, that is descriptive, that has sort of different textures to it, so that there are ways in for different kinds of readings.
It's a great workshop theme. Maybe for next time.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I never think so strategically about anything, really. So, but I feel like your audience finds you, not the other way around. Be you, be the Twitter you, and audience will follow. You'll find the people that are interested in what you're interested in. You'll find the people that want to talk about what you're interested in. I don't know, that has been my experience.
I don't know, kind of confused me a little bit, I will say. I think what it's interesting is to try to generate a critical attitude or a critical thinking. And maybe thinking about audiences, and that is like starting again from being the critic and talking to people. And maybe the first steps are to develop your own voice, being critical, being, I don't know, very committed to what you're writing, and communicate to others in a level that that network will start functioning without so much effort.
On that note, I think we should maybe wrap up. And just want to thank our presenters, and thanks all of you for coming and staying.